The bounty hunter's crossbow bolt buried itself in the doorframe 2 inches from Clyde Walker's ear, and the man who had fired it was already reloading when Yash Stonefist came through the tavern wall. Not the door. The wall. She hit the timber and plaster partition like a battering ram, her shoulder dropping at the last instant, and the whole section buckled inward with a crack like a breaking ship's mast. The bounty hunter, a thick-necked man named Gore who had been chasing her across 3 territories for 12 days, went down under the collapsed shelving and the shower of crockery that followed, and he stayed down. The tavern in Ashford's Crossing went absolutely silent. 40 men and women who had been drinking and arguing and gambling a moment before held their breath in collective shock. Yash straightened. She pulled a splinter from her bracer without looking at it, and her green-gold eyes moved across the room with the calm efficiency of a woman checking a market stall for ripeness. She was broad-shouldered and tall, nearly 6 feet of muscle and composure, dressed in fitted warrior's leathers that had been cut and cinched to move with her body. A sleeveless vest laced across a form that made the lacing work hard, high-waisted trousers tucked into knee boots worn pale at the knees from long riding, and bracers of dark brown leather riveted at the forearms. Her tusks were modest, carved smooth at the tips, and her black hair was pulled into a high knot that had survived the wall better than the wall had. The dark green of her skin caught the tavern's firelight and turned it gold. She looked at Clyde Walker as if he were the only person in the room. "You are the one they call the Orchard Man," she said. It was not a question. Clyde stood very still. He was 32 years old, lean in the way that outdoor work makes a man lean rather than the way hunger does, with sun-worn hands and a face that had seen a few more hard seasons than it deserved. He had come to Ashford's Crossing to sell 2 barrels of pressed apple liquor and a crate of dried pears. He had not come to be involved in anything like this. "That is what some people call me," he said carefully. "The bounty," she said, gesturing at Gore's unconscious form with one of those bracer-ringed forearms, "says I was seen leaving a burning farmstead in the Wester Reach with stolen goods. The farmstead was already burning when I arrived. The goods were mine. The man who actually set the fire paid the constable's office in Cresthalo to write the report the way he wanted it written, and the bounty office in 3 territories now believes I am an arsonist and a thief." She paused. "You know the Wester Reach. You worked it for 7 years as a sellsword. You know who runs the constable's office in Cresthalo." Clyde felt the familiar cold weight of a past he had tried very hard to leave behind. He had been 23 when he last took a contract in the Wester Reach. He had left not because the work dried up, but because he had grown tired of what the work was doing to the shape of his thinking. "Aldrich Pell runs the Cresthalo office," he said. "Aldrich Pell," she confirmed, "who has a long and profitable arrangement with a man named Dorvin Hast, who wanted my land for the iron underneath it and did not want to pay a fair price for it." Clyde looked at the hole in the wall. He looked at Gore, who was beginning to groan. He looked back at Yash Stonefist, who was watching him with an expression that was not desperate and not pleading and not anything so small as hopeful. It was evaluating. She was sizing him up the way a soldier sizes up a bridge, asking whether it will hold weight. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "A witness," she said. "Someone with history in the Reach who can stand in front of the territorial magistrate and say what Pell is, what Hast is." She paused again, and something moved behind those gold-green eyes that she covered quickly. "Someone they cannot easily dismiss." "They will try to dismiss me anyway," Clyde said. "Yes," she agreed, "but you were there for 7 years. You have names, dates, records of contracts filed under Pell's own seal that contradict the account he gave the bounty office. You know where the bodies are buried, Walker, figuratively." "Mostly figuratively," Clyde said. Her eyes narrowed, not with suspicion but with something that might, in a warmer moment, have been amusement. Gore chose that moment to roll over and reach for the crossbow that had come down with him, and Yash took 1 step and put her boot on his wrist with calm precision. The crossbow skittered away. She did not look down. "Will you help me," she said, "or not?" Clyde Walker had walked away from his sword 7 years ago, and planted 50 apple trees on a plot of borderland at the edge of the mapped territories, and he had told himself every season since that the quiet life was the right one. He looked at this woman, at the contained fury of her, at the particular dignity of someone who is wrongly accused and knows it and refuses to bow, and felt something shift in his chest that he could not entirely account for. "I have a cart outside," he said. "And the magistrate's circuit court reaches Fort Ashenmore in 14 days. That is a 4-day ride." She studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped off Gore's wrist and walked toward the door as if she had known all along he would say yes. Clyde paid for the wall before he left. He asked the innkeeper to send the bill to Aldrich Pell in Cresthaloe. The road north from Ashford's Crossing turned bad by the second afternoon. The wagon trails that connected the lowland towns to the resettlement territories were optimistically maintained at best and deliberately neglected at worst, and the stretch between the River Kell crossing and the high bluffs above Fort Ashenmore belonged firmly in the second category. Clyde drove the cart with the particular focused silence of a man who has spent a lot of time alone and does not feel the need to fill quiet with noise. Yash Stonefist sat on the bench beside him with her arms folded and her eyes on the tree line, watching for the 2 additional bounty hunters she had informed him were also working the contract. They did not speak much for the first day, and the silence was not unfriendly. It was the silence of 2 people who are still deciding what the other one is. On the second night, camped at the base of the Kell Bluffs with a fire small enough not to be seen from the road, she asked him why he had left the sellsword work. He was quiet long enough that she looked at him. "A job in the Reach," he said finally. "Town called Millhaven. The man who hired us said we were dispersing a bandit camp. It was not a bandit camp. He turned a stick in the fire. I walked off the contract and took 3 other men with me. We did not stop what happened, but we did not be part of it either." He paused. "I went home to my mother's farm, dug up the fruit trees she had started but never finished planting, and I stayed there." Yash was quiet. "The men who stayed and finished the Millhaven job," Clyde continued, "several of them now work for Dorvan Hast." Yash absorbed this slowly. "So your history in the Reach is not entirely comfortable." "No, but you will testify anyway." "Yes." She looked at him the way she had in the tavern with that careful structural assessment, except that the calculation in it had shifted into something else that she seemed to decide she needed to examine later. She looked back at the fire. "My name means iron hand in the old tongue," she said, which was not a change of subject so much as it was an offering. "My grandmother gave it to me." She said I came out swinging. Despite everything, Clyde smiled. "Did you?" "According to my grandmother, I knocked over 2 candlesticks and a very expensive ceramic owl." She paused. She was not wrong about the tendency. He laughed, a real one, not a polite one, and she watched the laugh happen with an expression she very quickly returned to neutral, but not before he caught the edge of it, something that might have been warmth. They made the Kell crossing by mid-morning of the 3rd day, and found the first of the 2 remaining bounty hunters waiting at the far bank with 3 companions. His name was apparently Tev, and he was the professional sort, no dramatics, just a crossbow leveled at Clyde's chest and a calm request for Yash to step off the cart. Yash stepped off the cart. What happened next was one of those moments that people in that part of the borderlands talked about for years afterward. Not because it was particularly long or complicated, but because of the specificity of it, the way a master craftsman completes a task with exactly the minimum required effort and not an ounce more. The 4 men were armed. 2 had crossbows drawn. 1 had a short sword already out. The 4th was holding the reins of their horses and watching with the particular expression of a man who was already regretting his career choices. Yash did not hurry. She walked toward Tev at a pace that seemed entirely conversational, and when he told her to stop, she did stop, and she said, in a voice that carried over the river noise with perfect clarity, "Lower the weapon and walk away, and I will not break anything you need for daily use." Tev did not lower the weapon. What happened afterward was brief. The man with the short sword went into the river. Not violently. She redirected him with a pivot and a palm flat to his sternum, and he simply stepped backward off the bank with a look of pure bewilderment and sat down in 3 feet of cold water. Tev's crossbow discharged into the ground because she took hold of the stock before he could make the shot count and pointed it there, and then she lifted him, a grown man in riding leathers and a brigandine one-handed, fingers wrapped in his collar, and held him at arm's length over the rushing water of the Kell Ford. The man with the horses made a sound. Tev made a different sound. Yash held him there for 3 seconds, which felt much longer, and said, "The bounty is fraudulent. Aldrich Pell in Cresthelo wrote a false account. If you would like to be part of a criminal conspiracy against a territorial magistrate's court, you are welcome to continue pursuing this contract. If not, I suggest you find different work." She set him down on the bank. Tev sat there for a moment. Then he looked at the man in the river, who was wet and furious. Then he looked at the 4th man, who was nodding very slowly in the direction of the road south. They left. Clyde had watched the entire thing from the cart bench without moving, and when Yash walked back and climbed up, he handed her the reins without comment and picked up his apple from the seat beside him and took a bite. She looked at him. "You are not frightened of me," she said. "I watched you handle 4 men like a woman reorganizing furniture," he said. "What I am is impressed." Something flickered in her face again, there and gone, faster this time, but he was starting to learn where to look. They reached Fort Ashenmore on the evening of the 4th day. Fort Ashenmore was not a fort anymore, or at least not entirely. It had been a military outpost during the last territorial war, and before that a trading waypoint, and before that a Wester clan winter camp, and layers of all of those histories were visible in its walls and buildings in the way geological layers are visible in a cut hillside. Several someones over the past 2 years had been resettling it. New timber framing stood against old stone walls. A smithy had been reopened in what had once been a stable block. There was a tavern, a trading post, a handful of permanent residences, and the skeletal framework of what would eventually be several more. The people who had come to remake this place at the edge of the mapped territories were the kind of people who come to edges, those who cannot fit where the world is already fully formed, those who are building something new because the old things did not have room for them, and a significant number who are simply fleeing something they hope the distance will solve. The magistrate's circuit court would not arrive for 9 days. 9 days. Clyde negotiated a room at the trading post from a sharp-eyed woman named Merritt, who ran Ashenmore's commerce with the focused intensity of a person who had identified an opportunity and intended to exploit it thoroughly. He asked for 2 rooms. Merritt gave him one look at Yash and then gave him 2 rooms that shared a wall. "It is a small fort," Merritt said, which covered a multitude of implications. On the first evening, Clyde walked the fort's perimeter in the late light and found that someone had planted a small orchard in the angle between the old south wall and the new smithy's 6 trees, young but established, the kind of mix that suggested the planter had known what they were doing. He stood at the fence looking at them for a long time. Yash found him there. She had changed nothing about her appearance, the warrior's leathers, the high knot, the bracers, but the evening light did different things to the green gold of her skin than the midday sun had, and Clyde was aware of being aware of her in a way that required a small amount of internal management. "You miss it," she said, looking at the trees. "I miss my own trees," he clarified. "But yes, it is essentially the same thing. You planted 50 trees and then left them to come here with a stranger on a legal errand. My neighbor's son is watching them. He is 16 and reliable." Clyde paused. "And you are not a stranger anymore. We have slept in the same camp 3 nights. That is practically old friends." She looked at him with that measured expression she used when she was deciding how much to reveal. "In the clans," she said carefully, "one does not invite an acquaintance to share a camp 3 consecutive nights unless one intends something by it." Clyde met her eyes. "What does one intend?" The question hung there, honest and quiet, without any of the performance that might have made it easier to deflect. Yash looked away first, which surprised him. She looked at the small orchard and the darkening sky above it, and when she spoke her voice was level but very slightly careful in the way of someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. "I intend to win this case," she said. "After that, I have not decided." It was a beginning. Clyde recognized it as such and did not push it further, and they stood together in the evening quiet looking at the 6 young trees until the smithy's fire died down and the fort settled into its night sounds. The 9 days before the magistrate arrived were not idle. On the second day, word came through the trading post that Dorvan Hast had sent a representative to Ashenmore, a smooth man named Kessler who wore a merchant's coat and carried a purse that he was apparently prepared to apply to the problem in the direct way. He arrived with 2 bodyguards and immediately began having conversations with the fort's residents, none of which were ostensibly about the upcoming case, but all of which circled it like dogs around a fire. Clyde saw Kessler watching Yash from across the trading post's common room on his first afternoon, and he recognized the specific quality of that watching, the kind that is assessing not danger but vulnerability, looking for leverage. He crossed the room and sat down at Kessler's table without being invited. Kessler looked at him with smooth professional surprise. "Can I help you?" "I am Clyde Walker," Clyde said. "I worked the Wester Reach for 7 years. I knew Aldrich Pell before your employer bought his cooperation. I filed 3 contracts under his seal between 12 and 15 years ago, and I have copies, and one of them directly contradicts the incident report he filed regarding the Stonefist land claim. I will be testifying before the magistrate in 7 days. I wanted to introduce myself." Kessler's smooth expression developed a small crack. "I wanted to introduce myself," Clyde repeated pleasantly, "because I think it is fair to let a man know who will be speaking against his employer before it happens, rather than let him be surprised. That is all." He stood. "I hope you enjoy your stay. Merritt's trading post has reasonable food." He walked back across the room and felt Yash's eyes on him from the doorway where she had been standing, watching. Later that evening, in the narrow corridor between their rooms, she stopped him with a hand on his sleeve. Just the brief grip of it, fingers on cotton, and then she released. "That was either very brave or very reckless," she said. "In my experience, those are the same thing depending on the outcome," he said. She looked at him for a moment that was 1 beat longer than neutral, and then she went to her door and said without turning, "Thank you, Walker." "Clyde," he said. A pause. "Clyde," she said, and went inside. On the 4th day, Kessler's bodyguards made a more direct attempt. Clyde was at the well in the fort's central yard, filling a bucket for the small kitchen Merritt had assigned to his use, when the 2 men appeared from separate directions in a way that was designed to look casual and was not. The yard was not empty. A woman was hanging washing on a line near the south gate, and 2 men were loading timber near the smithy, but it was quiet enough that the intent was clear. The first bodyguard said something about Clyde reconsidering his plans to testify, framed as a suggestion, delivered with the confidence of a man who usually delivered suggestions that were accepted. Clyde set down the bucket. He was 32 and had not carried a sword in 7 years, but his body remembered things his mind had tried to put away, and he felt the old geometry of a potential fight arrange itself around him with the particular clarity that comes from having been in several. "No," he said. The bodyguard's companion had moved to his flank, and Clyde was in the process of recalculating whether being right about the importance of testifying was going to extend past this particular afternoon, when Yash came around the corner of the smithy at a pace that had both men turning. She was carrying a timber, a full oak beam, the kind used for structural framing, perhaps 12 feet long and weighing something in the range of 250 pounds. She was carrying it over one shoulder with the easy distraction of a woman who had picked it up on the way past, because it needed to be moved, and she was walking this direction anyway. She set it down near the smithy entrance with a sound like a small earthquake, brushed her hands together, and looked at the two bodyguards with polite inquiry. "Are you two helping with the framing?" she asked. "We could use strong backs." The timber had landed close enough to be a statement. The bodyguards looked at her, and conducted a rapid, silent conversation between themselves. "We were just leaving," the first one said. "Helpful of you," Yash said warmly. They left. The woman hanging washing had stopped and was staring openly. The two men at the timber pile were staring. The entire small yard was perfectly still. Yash looked at Clyde with that carefully neutral expression. "The south framing needed that beam anyway," she said. "I did not doubt it for a moment," he said, "and meant neither the beam nor the timing." And she heard both meanings and did not comment on either, but she picked up his water bucket and handed it to him, and her fingers touched his when she did. It was entirely possible that that was accidental. It was entirely possible that it was not. On the sixth day, Kessler left. He departed on horseback before sunrise and did not say farewell, and Clyde read the departure as the sign it was. Hast had decided that direct interference was more risk than the legal case itself, and had recalled his man. It meant they were confident in what Pell had filed, which meant the next days were going to be about the quality of Clyde's evidence and Yash's testimony, and nothing else. That evening Clyde spread his papers on the table in the shared kitchen, and Yash sat across from him, and they went through every contract, every seal, every date. She had documents of her own, a land deed, a survey record, a payment receipt that placed her in a town 30 miles from the farmstead on the afternoon it burned. He had his filed records, and he had 2 letters he had kept for 11 years from other Reach contractors that referenced Pell's arrangements with landholders in the district. They worked for 4 hours and the candle went to a stub, and at some point the quality of the silence between them changed. It was no longer 2 people working toward a shared goal. It was 2 people who were comfortable with each other in a way that neither of them had quite named yet. Yash had unclipped one bracer and set it on the table, and the small domestic gesture of it, the unbuckling, the setting aside, the willingness to be partially unarmored in this room with this man, was not lost on Clyde even as he read through the contract language. "You were good at it," she said, looking at his handwriting in the old contracts. "The sellsword work. These are careful records." "I was adequate," he said. "I was better at the accounting than the fighting. That is not what the Kelford boys thought. I did not do anything at the Kelford. You did everything at the Kelford. You handed me the reins," she said, without hesitation, without needing to be the one handling it. He looked up and found her watching him with an expression she had not quite finished assembling into something neutral, and his chest did the thing it had been doing with increasing frequency around her. "It seemed like the sensible division of labor," he said carefully. "Most men," she said, and paused, and chose her next words with precision, "find it difficult when a woman handles a thing they could not handle themselves. Most men have not watched you carry a framing beam on one shoulder." She held his gaze for a long moment, and then she smiled, a real one, the kind that changed her whole face, that made the firelight catch the gold in her eyes and the clean lines of her jaw and the modest tusks that framed the expression and made it entirely, specifically hers. It was the first time he had seen that smile, and it made him feel like he had found something he had not known he was looking for. He looked back down at his papers and spent the next several minutes seeing absolutely none of the words on them. "We should sleep," she said eventually. "The magistrate arrives in 3 days." "Yes," he said. She reattached her bracer and gathered her own documents and went to the door that connected to her room. She paused there with her hand on the frame. "Clyde," she said. "Yes. Whatever happens with the magistrate, I want you to know that I understand what you are risking, your name in the Reach. The people who know you there." She turned, just the profile of her face in the candle's last light. "I do not take it lightly." "I know," he said. "That is exactly why I am doing it." She stood there for a beat longer than was necessary, and then she went through the door, and he sat alone with his papers and the dying candle and the particular complicated ache of knowing something was true before you are quite ready to say it out loud. The morning of the magistrate's arrival, the second bounty hunter found them. The last name on Yash's list was a woman named Brass, which was clearly not her birth name but was apparently the only one she used, and she was different from the others, older, quieter, and operating alone. She arrived at dawn on foot, which meant she had left her horse somewhere outside the fort to avoid the gateman's log, and she came over the east wall rather than through the gate, which meant she was serious. Clyde found her in the corridor between the rooms, which was either coincidence or intent, and he was fairly sure it was intent. Brass was perhaps 45, lean and weathered, with the patient eyes of a tracker rather than a fighter, and she looked at Clyde with a kind of professional appraisal that was not hostile. "I am not here to make trouble," she said, which was an interesting opening for a woman who had climbed a wall at dawn. "I am here because I know Aldrich Pell, and I have known for 3 months that this contract is rotten, and I have been following it anyway because the payout clears a debt I need cleared." She paused. "I am also here because whoever she testifies against has the kind of money that makes problems disappear, and the kind of friends that make witnesses disappear, and I thought someone should know that before the court day." Clyde looked at her for a long moment. Then he knocked on Yash's door. Yash emerged fully armed and fully awake, because apparently Yash slept in a state of readiness that most soldiers would find excessive, and she looked at Brass with the expression she used for threats. Brass looked back at her with the expression of someone who had fully analyzed the threat level and was at peace with it. "I know where Hast keeps his corresponding letters," Brass said to Yash. "I have done work for him before. I know which letters would end this case on the first day." She named a number, "enough to clear my debt and leave some." Yash looked at Clyde. Clyde looked at Brass. "How long have you been in this line of work?" 22 years. "Are you tired of it?" Brass blinked. "Extraordinarily." "Ashenmore is resettling," he said. "They need people who are good at knowing where things are and getting to places without being seen. That is a skill set with legitimate applications." Brass looked around the corridor, then back at him, with an expression of someone encountering a line of thinking they had not anticipated. "You are a very strange man," she said. "People keep saying that," Clyde said. "Will you get the letters?" Brass got the letters. She returned at mid-morning with a thin leather case containing 6 documents that she had apparently removed from a locked box in Kessler's vacated room before he had a chance to take it when he left, which was either extraordinarily good planning or extraordinary luck, and the expression on Yash's face when she read the first letter was the most quietly satisfied thing Clyde had ever seen. The letters were precisely what Brass had promised. Written in Hast's own hand to Pell, they outlined the arrangement, the price, the desired outcome of the report, and most importantly, the fact that the fire at the Stonefist farmstead had been deliberately set by Hast's employees on Hast's instruction, which made the entire bounty not merely fraudulent but a cover for arson and land theft. "This ends the case," Yash said, looking up from the documents with something bright and barely contained behind her eyes. "This ends the case," Clyde confirmed. She looked at the letters for another moment, then she looked at Brass. "The amount you named. You heard me correctly. You will have it before sundown." Yash rolled the letters carefully and returned them to the case. "And Walker's offer stands if you want it." Brass spent a long moment looking between them, and then she looked around the corridor again with the expression of someone performing a genuine calculation about the rest of her life. "I will think about it," she said. She was still in Ashenmore 2 weeks later. She had renegotiated with Merritt and taken on the fort's east wall monitoring. The magistrate arrived at noon with a small retinue and the brisk efficiency of a woman who covered a circuit of 12 settlements in 14 days and had no patience for cases that wasted her time. Her name was Joran Tivith. She was perhaps 50, and she had the particular sharp courtesy of someone who had heard every variety of human dishonesty and had long since stopped being surprised by any of them. She looked at the documents Yash and Clyde presented, then at Hast's letters, and then at Clyde's filed records from 11 years ago with Pell's seal on them, and the look on her face cycled through professional assessment into something grimmer and more purposeful. "You have been carrying this case across 3 territories on a horse," she said to Yash. "4," Yash said, "with a fraudulent bounty active. 2 active. The third expired when one of the hunters reconsidered." Tevith looked at Clyde. "And you are the witness with history in the Reach." "Yes, magistrate. Are you aware that Aldrich Pell has twice before had challenges to reports he filed dismissed for lack of corroboration?" "I am aware," Clyde said. "I have a name for each challenge and the reason each one was withdrawn." Tevith looked at him for a moment with a slight adjustment to her expression that was the magistrate's equivalent of a nod. She made a note. "Bring me everything tomorrow morning," she said. "I will begin preliminary review this afternoon." As they left the magistrate's temporary office, a cleared room in the trading post with a folding table and 2 lanterns, Yash walked beside Clyde in the late afternoon light, and neither of them said anything for half the length of the yard. Then she said quietly, "It is actually going to work." "Yes," he said, "it is." She stopped. He stopped. The yard was busy around them, the resettlement work continuing, hammers and voices and the smell of fresh timber and cook fires. But they were still in the middle of it, and she looked at him with something unguarded and open and entirely undefended in her expression, the kind of look that a person gives only when they have stopped performing composure and are simply in the moment. "I came to Ashford's Crossing looking for a witness," she said. "Someone who knew the Reach, someone they could not dismiss." She paused. "I did not expect someone like you. What did you expect?" "Someone who would need something in return." She held his gaze. "Man who does something difficult because it is the right thing, without asking what it is worth to him, that is not common." "I asked for nothing because nothing was the right price," he said simply. She looked at him for a long moment in which the sounds of the fort seemed to recede slightly. Then she stepped closer deliberately, with intention, and she put her hand against his jaw, not grasping, just the flat, warm weight of her palm, and said, "You are going to be very difficult to leave, Clyde Walker." It was the most honest thing she had said to him in 9 days, and it landed in his chest like a coal dropped in dry tinder. He covered her hand with his own and felt her fingers shift, not pulling away, but curling slightly, settling. "Then do not leave," he said. Her eyes searched his. Something behind them was deciding, weighing that careful structural assessment again, but aimed at something entirely different than bridge architecture. Then she withdrew her hand slowly, not coldly, and said, "The case first. Then we talk." He let his hand fall. "All right," he said. That night he lay in his room with the sounds of the fort settling around him, and did not sleep well at all. But it was not an unhappy wakefulness. It was the particular charged wakefulness of a man who has begun to understand that his life is about to shift on its axis. The case took 2 days. Tevith was thorough and moved quickly, and Clyde spent the first day in testimony that lasted 4 hours, covering his history in the Reach with Pell's name in it, the specific contracts, the specific dates, and then the broader pattern of Pell's operations that the letters from Hast's own hand confirmed. He was calm and precise, and answered everything directly, and when Kessler's legal man, who had apparently been hired from a retaining firm in the lowlands, and had arrived by fast horse the evening before, attempted to characterize his testimony as vendetta, he said, flatly and without heat, "I have no financial or personal stake in Pell's reputation. I left the Reach 11 years ago and have not returned. What I have is accurate records and the memory of a clear-eyed man, and I am happy to answer any specific factual challenge to either." The legal man did not produce a specific factual challenge. Yash's testimony the next morning was as direct as she was. She laid out the timeline of her land claim, the attempts Hast had made to buy the land below market value, the day she had returned to the farmstead to find it burning and found 2 of Hast's known employees leaving at speed, the town 30 miles away where she had lodged that afternoon before the fire with 3 witnesses who could confirm her presence. And then she set Hast's letters on Tevith's table, and the room, which had filled with Ashenmore's residents who had nothing better to do than watch a magistrate's hearing on a slow morning, went completely still. Tevith read the letters. Tevith set them down. Tivith looked at Kessler's legal man with an expression that could have cured leather. "The bounty is vacated," Tivith said. "Effective immediately. I am issuing a warrant for Aldrich Pell in Cresthelloe on charges of corruption of official record, fraudulent filing of a territorial bounty, and conspiracy in the commission of arson. I am issuing a separate warrant for Dor van Hast on the same charges plus incitement. The Stonefist land claim is confirmed as valid and is to be noted in the territorial record under this seal." She picked up her pen. "This hearing is concluded." The room erupted. Not in anger, but in something more complicated. The particular sound of a crowd that has seen something go the way it should go and is not quite sure how to handle it, because it does not happen often. Several Ashenmore residents who had been watching clapped, which was not customary at a magistrate's hearing, but which Tivith allowed with a very slight and almost invisible smile. Clyde was standing at the side of the room. Yash was at the table, rolling her land deed into its case, and she looked up and across the room at him, and the look between them was not a shout or a celebration, but something quieter and more fundamental, the look of two people who have stood in a difficult place together and come out the other side, and know what that means. Outside in the yard, in the full noon light with half the fort watching because word travels in a small resettlement with the speed of all small communities, Yash came to stand beside him. "It is done," she said. "It is done," he agreed. Several people were watching them. Merritt from the trading post doorway. Brass from the east wall, arms folded and expressionless in the way that meant she was paying close attention. The magistrate's two retinue members, a handful of residents who had found reasons to be in the yard. Yash stood in the full light and said, clearly enough to be heard by anyone in the immediate vicinity, "I told you I would leave at first light after the hearing." "You did," he said. He had not forgotten. She had said it the night before, flatly and practically, standing in the doorway of her room, that the moment the case concluded she would collect her land deed and ride south to the Stonefist land, which was legally hers again and needed her attention, and that was the plan and she was keeping to it. "I still intend to," she said. "I know," he said. "I know that is what you said." She looked at him in the noon light with that expression she used when she was being most honest, open-faced, undefended, doing the thing she never did with anyone else, which was letting him see exactly what was happening behind her eyes. "It would be the sensible thing," she said. "Sensible," he agreed. "There is nothing tying me here," she continued. "The case is closed. The land is mine again. There are practical things I need to be doing on that land." "All true," he said. "There is no reason to stay." "None that I could argue," he said, and then added carefully, "except for the one I could not argue at all, which is that I would like you to." She looked at him. The yard was very quiet now in the way that yards full of trying to appear disinterested people go quiet. "You would like me to stay," she said. "Very much," he said. "I have apple trees in the western borderlands, and the people building this fort need someone who knows how to carry a framing beam, and the magistrate left a vacancy in the Ashenmore record office that wants someone honest to fill it, and none of those things are why I am asking. I am asking because you are the most remarkable person I have met in 32 years of meeting people, and I spent 9 days in a cart and a fort and a magistrate's hearing with you, and every one of those days, the idea of not being near you made me feel worse than the idea before it." He paused. "That is all I have. You can leave at first light, and it would be correct and practical and entirely your right. But I wanted to say it plainly." She held his gaze. The yard held its collective breath. Then she said, "Where is the coffee?" He blinked. "What?" "You said first light," she said, and something had appeared at the edge of her expression that was warmth and heat and the particular amusement of a woman who has made up her mind and is enjoying the moment of it. "It is past noon. I am already late. If I am going to stay past the time I said I would leave, there should be coffee." He stared at her for one full beat, and then he understood, and the feeling that moved through him in that moment was the specific overwhelming warmth of being chosen, not settled for, not accepted, but actively, deliberately, eyes open chosen by a woman who could choose anything, who had looked at him with all her considerable intelligence and decided he was worth staying for. "I have a pot on in the kitchen," he said. "Then I will sit down," she said. She walked past him toward the trading post, and Clyde Walker stood in the fort yard for one stunned, blazing moment before following her. And the watching crowd of Ashenmore did the only thing a community of people building something new at the edge of the map could reasonably do when witnessing a moment like that. They went back to work, smiling. The coffee was the dark, bitter kind that Merritt stocked in the trading post, brewed strong over a wood fire, and Yash sat at the kitchen table with her hands around a clay mug and her land deed rolled beside her and said nothing for a while, and Clyde sat across from her and also said nothing, and the silence this time was not the silence of strangers or colleagues. It was something warmer and more complete. "Tell me about the apple trees," she said finally. He told her. He told her about the borderland plot, the way the soil was the right mix of loam and gravel for the variety he was growing, the 2 seasons of frost damage he had recovered from, the particular satisfaction of the first harvest that came in well after 4 years of nursing the trees through establishment. He told her about the stone cottage he had built half by himself and half with the help of a neighboring family, who had needed extra hands at the same season. He had needed extra hands, and how that kind of mutual practical arrangement was the actual tissue of a life at the edge. She listened with the focused attention she gave everything, asking specific questions, practical, grounded questions about soil treatment and rootstock and the water table, and he realized with a kind of wondering pleasure that she actually knew something about orcharding, that her grandmother had kept a small one at the clan's winter camp. And the conversation moved between them with the ease of 2 people discovering shared ground where they had not expected it. "I will need to go back to the land," she said eventually. "Not immediately, but within the month, to assess what Hast's people did to it, file the new deed with the Territorial Record Office in Cresthelloe." "Cresthelloe will have a new record officer in a month," Clyde said. "Yes," she paused. "But even so, the land needs assessment. I need to know what I am working with before I can make plans." "I will come with you." She looked at him over her mug. "If you want me to," he added. "You have apple trees," she said. 50 apple trees in the care of a very reliable 16-year-old, he said. "They will survive another few weeks." She looked at him in the way she had in the yard, open and clear-eyed and making a decision. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. She finished her coffee and he refilled it, and she did not leave that day or the next. The days that followed in Ashenmore had a different quality than the 9 before them. The urgency was gone, the legal pressure, the watching over shoulders, the focused preparation for the hearing. What replaced it was something slower and warmer, and in some ways more difficult, because the charged necessity of the case had given them a framework that no longer existed, and without it, they had to choose to be in each other's company simply because they wanted to be, which was both easier and more exposing. They helped with the fort's resettlement work. Clyde had construction knowledge from building his own cottage and from years of watching other men build camps, and the Ashenmore framing crew accepted him without ceremony, because capable hands are capable hands when you are trying to get a roof on before the cold season. Yash worked alongside, and the crew's initial wariness. Most of them had had limited experience with orcs, and the few who did not have warm associations dissolved within 2 days because she could do in an afternoon what would take 2 of them a morning. And she did it without commentary or demand for recognition. And she helped the young apprentice builder named Osric with his tenon joints, with a patience that earned her more goodwill than the timber carrying had. Clyde watched this happening and felt something in his chest expand with a pride that was probably not his to own, but existed anyway. He watched the fort's people adjusting their understanding of who she was, revising the story they had arrived with about what orc women were and were not, and he thought about Millhaven, about the things that happen when the story people tell themselves is more comfortable than the truth, And he thought that Yash Stonefist standing patiently next to Osric explaining tenon joints was worth more against that particular human tendency than anything Clyde's sword had ever accomplished. On the fourth day after the hearing, they were on the south wall watching the sunset, which had become a thing they did without planning it. One of them arrived and then the other, drawn by the same reliable pull of ending the day in the same place. The light was doing its elaborate performance over the western hills, and Yash was leaning on the parapet with her arms folded and her profile caught in gold, and Clyde was standing close enough that their arms touched, neither of them adjusting for it. "In the clan," she said, continuing a conversation they had been having for 3 days in a way that was becoming habitual between them, "when a warrior decides she wants someone, she marks them." Clyde had learned by now not to respond immediately to these openings, because she was building somewhere and the destination was worth waiting for. "It is not obligatory for them," she continued. "The marked person decides, but the warrior claims the right to name what she wants plainly. It is considered a form of honesty. I respect that," he said. "Most human men find it alarming. I am not most human men." She looked at him. "No," she said thoughtfully, as if she was still getting used to that being true. "You are not." She paused again, and the pause had weight. "I want you, Clyde Walker. I have wanted you since the Kell Ford and more every day since, and I am not comfortable pretending otherwise." He turned to face her fully, and she turned to face him, and the last light was behind her and the fort was below them, and he thought, "This is the moment I will remember." "I want you too," he said. "I have been terrible at hiding it." "You have been terrible at hiding it," she confirmed, and the warmth in her voice was the warmth of relief, the particular warmth of a very self-contained person putting something down that they have been carrying. She reached up and touched his jaw again, the way she had in the yard, but not withdrawing this time, and he covered her hand with his and turned his face slightly into the warmth of her palm, and she made a small sound that was not quite a breath. He kissed her, or she kissed him. The distinction was unclear, and beside the point because the kiss was mutual in the way of two people arriving at the same place from opposite directions. She was warm and solid and entirely present, and she kissed the way she did everything fully, without reservation, having decided and then committing. His hands found her waist, and the leather there was warm from the day's sun, and her other hand came up to his shoulder and gripped, not gently but not roughly, with the honest, unself-conscious strength of her. When they broke, she did not step back, and he did not step back, and they stood together in the gold end of the day with the fort below them and the western hills going red, foreheads nearly touching. "This is going to complicate things," she said, which was clearly not actually a concern because her voice carried no concern in it whatsoever. "Extremely," he agreed. She laughed the full laugh, not the barely there amusement but the real one, and he felt it against his chest, and thought that he could spend a considerable amount of time working toward that laugh and not consider any of it wasted. That night she came to his room. She knocked and he opened the door, and she stood in the doorway in the firelight with her bracers unclipped and her hair down for the first time, black and heavy past her shoulders, and he looked at her in the way he had been carefully not looking at her for 12 days and let himself simply look, and she looked back at him without armor. "I am not a person who does things halfway," she said. "I know," he said. "And I am not a person who stays out of habit or obligation," she said. "If I stay, it is because I choose to stay, and if I leave, it will be because I choose to leave, and I will always tell you which one it is. I would never want it any other way," he said. She stepped inside and he closed the door, and the fire in the small grate made the room warm and close, and she was there, solid and real, and the specific miraculous fact of her wanting to be in this room with him, wanting him, was something he could not entirely contain. He touched her face with both hands gently, and she closed her eyes for a moment with an expression that was entirely unguarded, not fierce, not composed, just present and wanting to be where she was, and then she opened her eyes and reached for him, and the night settled around them, warm and private and theirs. In the morning there was coffee. He had the pot ready before first light because he had been awake, thinking, not with the restless unhappiness of the nights before, but with the particular alert brightness of a man whose life has just changed its shape. And he had started the fire and ground the beans Merritt stocked, and had the pot going by the time the sky was turning gray. Yash came out of the bedroom that they had shared for the first time and stood in the doorway of the kitchen in the gray early light, her hair still loose, and she said, in a voice that was still slightly soft from sleep, "You have coffee." "I have coffee," he said. She sat down at the table and he filled her mug, and she wrapped her hands around it and looked at him over the rim, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the silence was the best kind, the kind that does not need filling because it is itself a form of fullness. "I said I would leave at first light," she said. "You did." She looked at the coffee. She looked at the window, where the sky was continuing its transition from gray to something warmer. She looked at him. "I am going to sit here for a while," she said. "Take as long as you need," he said. She sat. He poured his own cup and sat across from her, and they watched the dawn come over Fort Ashenmore through the kitchen window together. And it was, in all the ways that actually count, one of the best mornings of his life. They left for the Stonefist land 12 days later, having spent the interval helping Ashenmore with its framing, watching brass settle into her east wall responsibilities with the focused competence of someone who has found an unexpected fit. And in the evenings, in the small shared kitchen over coffee and maps, and the comfortable accumulation of shared time, talking in the way that people talk when they are building something together, laying down the floor joists of a shared life. The ride south was 4 days, and it bore no resemblance to the ride north. They were not strangers now and not allies of necessity, and the silences between them were warm, and the conversations were long and wide-ranging. And at night they camped with a single fire and slept without the careful separate distances of the first journey. Clyde drove and Yash rode her own horse alongside, and occasionally she cantered ahead and came back, and he watched her move on horseback with the full appreciation of a man who has stopped trying to manage what he felt. The Stonefist land was in the middle foothills, a parcel of several acres on a gentle south-facing slope with good drainage, and as Yash had told him, iron in the underlying rock, which was what had made it valuable to Hast, and what had made it the kind of thing worth fighting for. The farmstead was damaged but not destroyed. The house had been partially burned and would need significant work. The outbuildings were largely intact. The land itself, the fields, the kitchen garden plot, the small wood at the north edge was exactly what she had described, and he stood on the slope and looked at it and felt what she must have felt looking at it after the fire, both loss and the knowledge that loss is not the same as destruction. "What do you think?" she asked, standing beside him. He looked at the slope, the drainage, the light. "South-facing," he said. "Good stone content in the topsoil from the runoff. You know what would do well here?" She looked at him. "Apple trees," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "You have 50 trees on your borderland plot." "I do," he said. "They would manage without me for a season while these ones establish." And then he paused and chose his next words with care because they mattered. "And then we would have 2 orchards, or one larger one, depending on what we decided." She stood looking at the slope for a long time. "That is a very large decision," she said. "Yes," he said. "I know. I am not asking you to decide it today. I am just pointing out the slope." She looked at him with that expression she had in the fort yard when she had asked about the coffee, warm and decided and free, the expression of a woman who has stopped weighing and started choosing. "You are pointing out the slope," she said. "Just the slope," he said. "Clyde Walker," she said, and stopped. "Yes." "Stop being careful," she said, with a heat underneath the words that was clear and direct and entirely her. "I know what you are pointing out. I am telling you that I want the same thing. I want you here. I want the orchard. I want the mornings with the coffee and the evenings on the wall and all of it." She paused. "I want you. That is the short version." He crossed the distance between them and kissed her on the hillside above her damaged farmstead, with the sky open and wide above them and the iron-rich earth under their boots. and she kissed him back with the full force of a woman who had decided and was not reserving anything. The repair of the farmstead took 4 weeks, and during those 4 weeks, the story of Yash Stonefist and Clyde Walker reached the surrounding communities in the way that stories travel across borderland country, through traders and travelers, and the efficient informal network of people who need to know things. The story was variously misrepresented, embellished, and improved in transit, as stories are, but the core of it held. A false bounty, a corrupt constable, a human sellsword turned orchardman who had testified before a territorial magistrate to clear an orc woman's name, and the letters that had ended Aldrich Pell's career and begun the legal proceedings against Dorvan Hast that would occupy the territorial court system for the better part of the following year. Pell's warrant was executed within 3 weeks of the hearing. He did not fight it. Hast fought it extensively through his legal man and several layers of appeal, but Hast was fighting a game he could not win because Tevith had sealed the original letters as evidence, and she was not the kind of magistrate who allowed sealed evidence to become unsealable. The proceedings moved as proceedings move, slowly and with grinding inevitability, and Yash received updates through the Territorial Record Office and read them at the kitchen table of the repaired farmstead while Clyde made coffee or tended the ground preparation for the first trees. The repair work was good, honest work. The farmhouse responded to attention the way old structures do when the bones of them are sound. The burned wall was the worst of it, and with a timber man from the nearest town and 4 days of focused effort it was resolved. The roof needed patching in 3 places. The windows needed new frames. The kitchen garden needed clearing and enriching. All of it was the kind of work that a person is glad to have, because it is purposeful and it leaves something real at the end of every day. They worked together with the easy coordination of people who have already learned each other's rhythms, and in the evenings they cooked simple meals from the stores they had brought and what the kitchen garden's surviving plantings provided, and they sat on the repaired south step watching the light go off the hills, and Clyde thought, "This is what I was trying to build those 11 years ago when I planted 50 trees and stopped carrying a sword. Not the orchard specifically. This. The shape of this." One morning near the end of the 4th week, a man rode up the track from the valley road, a merchant, by the look of him, with 2 pack horses, and stopped at the gate and looked from Yash to Clyde and back with an expression of confusion that shaded into disapproval. "This is the Stonefist land," he said. "It is," Yash said. She was in the yard with an axe splitting wood for the repair work, and she had the axe resting across her shoulders with her arms over it, entirely comfortable. The sun was behind her. "Thought it was Hast's land," the merchant said. "There was a legal misunderstanding that has since been resolved by a territorial magistrate," Yash said pleasantly. The merchant looked at Clyde, who was carrying timber from the woodpile. "You are working for her." "With her," Clyde said. The merchant's expression said many things that he did not quite say out loud. He looked at Yash again, at the axe, at the repaired farmhouse, at the cleared garden plot, at the evident fact of occupation and established life. "You are staying," he said to Clyde, and the tone of it carried the weight of its own surprise, the mild scandal of a human man sharing a life with an orc woman, the ancient stupid prejudice of it, the way that some people's worlds were organized around keeping certain combinations of people apart because the alternatives were too complicated for their comfort. Clyde set down his timber. He had answered this particular question in various forms across 32 years, and he had answered it silently by leaving rooms and by not looking at people directly, and by performing a kind of carefully non-committal neutrality that did not cost him anything because it did not claim anything. He was done with that. "Yes," he said clearly and completely. "I am staying." Yash looked at him. The merchant looked at him. He held the merchant's eyes and said it again because once was not always enough to land properly. "I am staying here. This is her land and her farmstead, and I am here because I want to be here and she wants me here, and that is the end of the matter." The merchant said nothing for a moment. Then he said he needed to be getting on, and he got on. Yash was still looking at Clyde. She had taken the axe off her shoulders and was holding it at her side, and her expression was the one he had seen on the wall at sunset, and in the kitchen in the first light morning, and on the hillside when she told him to stop being careful, the expression of a woman who has stopped expecting to be surprised by him and is still, reliably, surprised by him. "You did not have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. She crossed the yard and kissed him in the full morning light with the axe still in her hand, and the repaired farmhouse behind her and the valley below them and the hills above. And it was not a careful kiss or a private one. And if anyone on the valley road below them happened to be looking up at the south-facing slope, they would have seen exactly what it was. Hast's trial concluded in the late fall. The verdict, when it came, was communicated through the territorial record by a note in Tivith's precise hand. Dorvan Hast, guilty on all counts. Land acquisition by fraudulent means, conspiracy and arson, corruption of an official. The Stonefist land deed, already confirmed, was now confirmed twice and sealed against challenge for 20 years. Aldrich Pell had taken a deal testimony against Hast in exchange for a reduced sentence, and was spending 2 years in the territorial holding facility in Cresthelloe, where his replacement as record officer was, by all accounts, doing an excellent job. Yash read the note at the kitchen table. She read it through twice, carefully, with the particular attention she gave things that mattered. Then she set it down on the table and sat with her hands around her coffee mug, looking at nothing specific for a long moment. Clyde refilled her coffee and sat down across from her. "It is finished," she said. "It is finished," he said. She looked at the note again, then at him. "It has been 4 months since Ashford's crossing." "Yes," he said. "I came to that tavern looking for a witness," she said, in the tone of a person reviewing the sequence of events and finding them both logical and entirely improbable. "I came because someone told me the orchard man had worked the reach and was in the area and might be willing to testify. I expected a grizzled old man with a grudge." "I am 32, he said, slightly injured. "You are 32, she confirmed with the warmth that was his favorite sound. "And you drove me 4 days in a cart and stood up in front of a territorial magistrate and told the truth when it would have been much easier not to, and you made coffee in the morning, and you kissed me on my hillside, and you told a merchant you were staying in front of anyone who wanted to listen." She paused. "And now you are here." "I am here," he said. "I want you to keep being here," she said. It was not quite the same as what she had said on the hillside, or in the doorway of his room in Ashenmore, or in the fort yard. It was more settled than any of those, more foundational. Not as a guest, not as a visitor here. She met his eyes. "I am asking you plainly. That is the custom. You decide." He looked at her, at this woman who had come through a wall in a tavern 12 days into a false bounty, and had stood in front of a magistrate without flinching, and had carried a framing beam on one shoulder and kissed him on a hillside, and sat back down over coffee on a morning she had planned to leave, and who was now looking at him with the full direct gaze of a woman who has put everything on the table and is not afraid of the answer. "Yes," he said, "I am already here. I have been here since the Kell Ford, if we are being honest about it." "You handed me the reins," she said softly. "You handled 4 men like furniture," he said. She reached across the table and took his hand, and they sat together in the warm fall kitchen of the repaired farmstead, with the seal notice beside them and the coffee steaming, and the light coming through the new windows he had helped fit, and neither of them needed to say anything else because the thing between them had long since moved past the need for narration. 3 weeks later, Clyde brought a proposition. They were on the south slope, staking out the planting grid for the first 10 trees, apple trees. From stock he had arranged to have transported from a nursery in the lowlands, the same variety he grew on his own borderland plot, because he knew their soil requirements and their yield patterns, and because the south-facing slope was exactly right for them. He was measuring distances between stakes, crouching to check the alignment, and she was at the top of the row doing the same at her end. And the afternoon was one of those clear, cold fall afternoons when the air is sharp, and the light is honey-thick, and everything seems specific and real. "I want to propose something," he called up the slope. She drove a stake and waited. He walked up to her level and stood looking out over the valley with his hands in his pockets and the familiar geography of the thing he wanted to say arranged in his head. "I have a borderland plot with 50 trees. You have this land with the iron underneath and the south slope. They are 4 days apart. I have been going back and forth in my head about how to do this sensibly." "Have you reached a conclusion?" she asked. "The borderland plot has a standing buyer," he said. "A neighboring family who has wanted to expand into fruit for 2 years and has the means to do it. If I sold to them, I could bring the good rootstock here, replant on this slope, and the whole orchard would be in one place." He paused. "And so would I." She looked at him with the careful structure-assessing gaze that had been the first thing he ever learned to read on her face. "You would sell the trees. I would sell the land and bring the best of the stock. Some of it would not survive the transplant, but some would." "Those are your 11 years," she said. "Your mother's trees." "They are," he agreed. "I would be bringing the best of them here, where the slope is better, and the soil is what I would have chosen if I had been choosing rather than inheriting. And I would be here." He met her eyes. "With you, which is what I am choosing." She was quiet for a long time. The valley spread out below them, the hills behind them, the first stakes of the orchard row between them. "You are giving up your place," she said. "I am choosing a better one," he said. "There is a difference." She crossed the distance between the stakes and stood in front of him, close, the way she always stood, deliberately, having decided, and put both her hands on his face, cupping it, and looked at him with an expression so open and warm and specifically his that he felt it like a physical warmth. "You said in the clan, a warrior claims the right to name what she wants plainly," he said. "Yes. I am naming it. I want to be here. I want to be on this land with you. I want to finish the orchard, and I want to help repair whatever else needs repairing, and I want to get up in the morning and make the coffee, and I want to spend the rest of my life finding out what it is like to be the person you choose." He paused. "That is all." She looked at him for a long, long moment, and then she said, in a voice that was entirely steady and entirely sure, "In the old clan custom, when a warrior marks someone and they answer, there is a binding. It is not a ceremony in the human sense. It is a word spoken in front of witnesses and kept." She paused. "I would like to do that, if you will." "Yes," he said immediately, without needing to think about it. She smiled, the full smile, the one that changed her whole face and everything around it, and kissed him on the south slope above her farmstead, with the first orchard stakes between them and the cold, clear afternoon air all around. And it was the kind of kiss that is also a beginning, formal and certain and made of everything that had come before it. The binding, when they did it, was in Fort Ashenmore, because that was where it had started, and because Merritt had asked twice if they were ever coming back, and because Brass had said, in the particular dry tone she used for things she cared about, that she would like to see it, and because the magistrate Tevith happened to be in circuit again and had asked, with her sharp courtesy, to be notified. They rode north in the 3rd week of the fall. The fort had changed in the 4 months since the hearing, 3 more buildings completed, a second smithy fire going, a proper gate fitted to the east entrance, and Osric's timber work visible in every new roof line, cleaner and tighter than the first ones had been. Merritt had added a real common room to the trading post, with a stone floor and actual chairs. The binding was not long. Yash stood in the yard of Fort Ashenmore in the morning light, the same yard where she had walked past him carrying that beam, the same yard where she had told him she would leave at first light, and said what the old custom required, that she claimed him before the assembled, that she chose him plainly and without condition, and that she would keep choosing him. He said what he had to say, which was the plain human equivalent, that he was here and intended to stay here, that she was the person he wanted, that he had known it on the road and kept knowing it every day since. Tevith witnessed it with her pen and her seal, and an expression that was as close to moved as she was constitutionally capable of being. Merritt cried without any apparent embarrassment. Brass did not cry, but she made a sound that she very quickly covered by saying she had something in her throat, and no one challenged this. The Ashenmore residents who were in the yard, which was most of them because word in a small settlement travels at the speed of small settlements, watched with the particular mixed feeling of people who are genuinely happy about something they had not entirely expected to happen, and are recalibrating their understanding of what is possible in the world. Afterward, in the common room, with Merritt's coffee and the fire going, Clyde sat beside Yash with her hand in his and the whole room around them warm and alive, and he thought about Millhaven, and about 50 apple trees, and about a wall in a tavern in Ashford's Crossing, and about a woman who had sized him up like a bridge and decided he would hold weight. He thought about first light and coffee and sitting back down. He leaned close and said quietly, just for her, "You sat back down." She turned to look at him with the full, warm weight of everything they were and said, "I sat back down. Best decision anyone has made in my presence," he said. "In mine too," she said, and meant it. And he knew she meant it, and the fire was warm and the room was full and she was right there beside him. And everything, every root pulled, difficult, sword-weighted, orchard-tender, testimony-giving year of it had arrived here, at this exact warmth. He was not lonely. He had not been lonely since a certain green-gold morning in a fort kitchen when the coffee was ready and she had sat back down, and he did not expect to be lonely again. She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. Outside the fort walls, the northern hills were going gold in the fall light, and on a south-facing slope 4 days south, the first orchard stakes stood ready, and the ground was prepared, and everything that was going to grow there was going to grow there together. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.